All right, so welcome back. We're here again with another session with McLean International. We're lucky enough to have Amy with us. Today, we're going to be talking about hiring employees and how important it is to grow your team if you want to grow your business. We're going to be talking about how to pick a great assistant and how to look at hiring buyer's agents and eventually, hopefully, a seller's agent if your team is large enough and even if it needs it. Sometimes it doesn't need it. There's some of the largest realtor companies in Toronto, where we're based out of. They usually only have one selling agent who's the main team lead, and they have a
Mm.
few assistants and then a few buyers agents. But for the most part, they have very small teams and produce millions of dollars a year. So it doesn't take a huge team to create a giant business. So please welcome Amy, and we're going to get started on how to hire a dynamic employee.
Well, thank you, Stephen. You couldn't have given me a better intro today because this process really starts with getting clear on what you need. And what I've found over the years is that um, people tend to lean towards one or the other of two very clear directions when they figure out that they need help. And so we start by looking at what is it that's holding you back. And for most people, what we find is that you're buried in the paperwork and you're so focused on getting the current transactions to closing that you have to drop your prospecting activities. And that's not beneficial to anyone. It's not beneficial to your clients. It's not beneficial to the larger picture of your business as a whole. And so while sometimes, and it bears mentioning, sometimes you have really good systems in place and you're staying up with the transactions, but where you're falling down is you have buyer leads falling off your desk, then your first hire may be a buyer's agent. And that is not, it's not a rare situation, but it's certainly far less common than adding an administrative staff person. And so you've really got to look at what is it that's eating up the hours of my day. And maybe you don't have a good idea of what that is. So the best thing that you can do, best thing that you can do is analyze your hours. Where are you spending your time? So spend a week just tracking what activities are eating up your day. Chances are you're going to find it's dealing with the ins and outs of current transactions, making sure that all the I's get dotted and the T's get crossed, and you carry that paperwork through to a successful closing. So what do we do then? We've got this building awareness that we need help. We know we're working more hours in the day than what we can handle. Really important thing is what I see happen a lot, Stephen, is we see people just jump in, okay, I need help, I'm going to go find somebody, and then I'm just going to throw them into the mix and hope that through baptism by fire that they can figure it out while I just keep running around like a chicken with my head cut off. This is a recipe for failure. And so it's very important that we get clarity before we move into hiring somebody. Now, what does clarity entail? First of all, you've got to look for what are the tasks, specific tasks that this person is going to be taking on. And if you go back to the exercise that you walked through with documenting for a week what's eating up your time, I'm going to walk you through a little exercise here to develop that into a job description. Ultimately, when we get to the hiring stage, we want to already be prepared with a comprehensive job description that's going to articulate for us specifically what our expectations are of that person we've hired and gives them the confidence of knowing this is what I'm responsible for, and they can take ownership and move forward. So we take that list and we go through, and I want you to identify a couple of things. First, we're going to go through the list and say, all right, here's everything that I enjoy doing, and here are the things that I don't enjoy doing. So we're either a plus or a minus on everything in terms of what we like to do in our business. Once we've done that, we're going to go back through the list. And Stephen, you're going to assign a dollar amount to each of those tasks of what it would cost for you to hire someone else to do it. So for example, if you're stuffing mailings, you're folding letters, putting them in envelopes, getting postage on them, getting to the post office, you could probably hire a high school student, a neighbor's kid, a retiree to do that for an entry-level hourly amount. In terms of prospecting, you may not like to do it, but it may cost you a pretty significant hourly rate to hire someone who's licensed and qualified to do that on your behalf. And so ultimately, as we look at what is going to come off my plate, we're looking for those things that I both don't enjoy doing and are at a much lower dollar per hour rate. And those are the things that start to build your initial job description. So as we build that out, understand that there may be things that we enjoy doing, but really aren't the highest and best use of our time. They're really entry-level tasks that we could be paying someone else to do. And there are things that we may not enjoy doing. Maybe we don't like getting on the phone, but we know those are the things that bring the highest level return to the business and would cost us the most to hire out. And so those are going to be tasks that we retain. So this is where we start with the job description. And then as we build it out, we've got to look at this and say, okay, are the systems in place to support someone being able to do this? Or do I need to get to work on creating some systems because I'm keeping it all in my head? You know, that's, as you well know, Stephen, in the early stages of this business, we kind of try to keep everything up there in our beautiful brains. And it takes a while before we start developing all those systems out on paper so that we could bring somebody else in and they could perform that task pretty much without our help. Of course, we're always going to be a resource to them, right? But we really want to get these structures in place so that they don't have to be asking us on every single task that they're completing.
Yeah.
So then where do we go? Go ahead.
I mean, just on that note, so if you're this is a message, I guess, to everybody who's listening. It doesn't matter whether you are a seasoned veteran or you're a rookie in real estate. You can still begin to build a team. So for some of the new people in the business, you don't need to have a decade of experience to hire somebody to start working for you or with you. One of the best tools I've seen, obviously, it's great to hire an administrator person if you could afford their salary, which is you have to pay them regardless of what the performance is of your business. One of the best strategies you can use is hiring a buyer's agent or a colleague within the office or hiring somebody outside the office who wants to join your office to teach them on how to sell real estate. You may not know everything about selling real estate, but you could probably know enough to teach them along the way. And they can be your guide. They can be your buyer's agent. Say, look, here's the task you need to perform. You're basically building your team simultaneously as they're learning and you're learning all at the same time. So don't think you have to wait until you have years of experience to start this process.
You know, I would just piggyback on that because it's such a powerful point, Stephen, and say that most people shut down when they think of, oh, my first hire needs to be a full-time employee. That's also not the case. The beautiful thing about bringing someone on as a buyer agent who helps with the administrative tasks is you are helping somebody learn the systems of real estate and not just the sales aspect. And then you'll have someone who can help you train that admin person as you grow as a team. The other option that people often overlook is you don't have to hire full-time and you don't have to hire someone who sits right in your office. We're going to look at those tasks and say, all right, the things I need done, that person doesn't need to be sitting right next to me to do them. So maybe I'll hire someone virtually on a project basis just to do particular things for me. Maybe I get slowed down in the marketing piece and I can farm that out to somebody. Or maybe I get slowed down creating listing brochures and I go and get a resource who can do just those marketing pieces for me. Don't think in terms of all or nothing here. Think in terms of what is a reasonable thing for me to take on in my business right now. What can I do right now that's going to relieve some of the pressure that frees me up to generate more revenue? Because this is a cycle that's certainly driven by cash flow. We want to make sure that we've got the financial support to move forward with the commitment we're making, and not just the systems support. So thank you for bringing that in, Stephen, because it's a very important consideration.
Yeah, the cost is probably the number one consideration. It's probably what stops most people. And like you said, virtual assistants. I started using Express Assistant with Gabby, a couple years ago when I opened up Young Realty to help me out. But now it's to a point where she's almost working full time for me. So, but we basically did it a la carte. As I needed her, I'd pay her. But now she's sort of here all the time and almost officially a full time employee, and probably will be so next year. And in terms of buyer's agents, the other beauty about it is you don't necessarily have to pay them anything. You can just say, look, I'm going to teach you the business. You're a commission salesperson. When we make a deal, you get a percentage of the transaction. So you don't even need necessarily an income coming in to hire a buyer's agent.
It's a good point, because they've already made the decision to get into a commission-based business.
Yeah.
So don't rush into tying them to a desk. Give them an opportunity to be mentored by you, and you both win in that situation. So we've got the job description clarified, whether it's a part or a full-time role, whether it's project-based or it's just full-blown administrative. So where do we go next with that? It's time to tell the world, and what I mean by that is we're going to go out in a variety of channels to identify the person or persons that are going to help support the team. And that starts, if you're going to go out to Craigslist or even Monster.com, which is much more expensive route and typically for higher level hires. And it's in Canada, Craigslist is what, Kijiji?
Yeah, the equivalent is Kijiji, yeah.
So you're really, you're competing against a lot of other entities, and you need to have a compelling enough presence that you'll stand out. So let me recommend a couple of things, and we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on this, but when you get to this stage, if you're putting an ad out, first of all, having a compelling subject line. Start with the word wanted in all capital letters, like a wanted poster. It stands out from all of the other positions that are being offered online. And then in the ad, be very specific about what you're after. There's no need to be cute or coy about advertising for the help that you need. People prefer and appreciate directness at this stage of the game. The other thing I would strongly recommend, even if you are considering hiring a full-time administrative person, advertise as a temporary part-time position with the potential to grow into a permanent full-time position. What this does is it lays the expectation right from the get-go that there are no guarantees here. We've got to figure out if this is going to work for both of us, and that really starts with the ad. Now, just going straight ad is not the only way to find good help. There are certainly some other resources worthy of considering. First, think about all of the vendors that you cooperate with, and they are a great resource for referrals. They can bring connections to you that you wouldn't otherwise have. And so I recommend drafting an email or a letter to that group of individuals and let them know, this is what I'm looking to do. And if you know somebody who would be great in that role, please let me know. The other area that I've seen people have success with, and this doesn't work for all people, but it's certainly worked for some, is look at your own database. Reach out to them and let them know what the position is that you're hiring for. You may have a past client or customer that you had particularly positive interaction with. They already know how your system works, and so they've got an understanding and appreciation from that perspective, and they may be just the person to bring into your organization. So we've got all those resources. Now, the other thing I'm going to tell you, wherever you're asking for those candidates to come in, request them to send you their resume first as a PDF. And especially in an administrative role where you're expecting them to be proactive and resourceful, if someone's not able to figure out how to create a PDF to send to you, they may not have the proactivity and resourcefulness that you need to be on your team. So we get all these resumes in, and then what do we do with all of that? And by the way, even for people you know, you still want to get a resume. Even if it's a past client or customer, even if it's a recommendation from a friend or a colleague, the resume is your first glance at how organized are they, how articulate are they, how prepared are they to sell themselves on behalf of this role. And you really want to be able to look at that resume and, you know, you can start ruling people out right on paper. You can see, you know, if they don't have good grammar and you're expecting them to communicate regularly with your clients with updates, are you going to be happy with the quality of the communication that's going out? It's a valid concern. So now we're reading through those resumes and we're narrowing them down, and before you ever have someone come into the office, I'm going to suggest that you do a phone interview, because if these people are going to be communicating with your clients, you've got to know that they're going to be articulate over the phone. And so have a list of phone interview questions that you're going to start with just to determine, is this somebody that can fulfill the role that I need them to fulfill on the phone. And that, by the way, that's not just communicating with clients, that's communicating with you too. If you don't get a good sense over the phone that they're comfortable talking to you, and chances are, if you're a busy realtor, you're going to be out and doing a lot of your interactions with this person over the phone. Can they play with you on the phone? Can they keep up with your pace? Do they have the energy and the presence that you want them to have? So you're going to be able to rule another set of people out simply by the conversations that you have on the phone. And then you can narrow this group down, and typically at this stage of the game, you're 8 or fewer candidates, preferentially about 5, and you can have that first face-to-face interview. Now, if you already have other team members, I'm going to recommend that this first face-to-face interview just be with you. If they pass the next few steps of the process, then we're going to bring them back to interview with the team. During this first face-to-face interview, what are you looking for? Again, you're looking for presentation in addition to skill set. So do they come professionally dressed? Do they make eye contact with you? Are they nervous and fidgety while they're talking to you? All of these things matter when you consider what you want in the long run. Now, if we're hiring a virtual person, that's a little bit different process. Obviously, you're going to be talking to them over the phone and communicating via email. And so it's very important with VAs, and typically they're brought in on a project basis, that the focus is on their past experience with the specific type of project you're asking be done. And we could do a whole separate set of webinar topics just on hiring and holding accountable VAs. We're not going to spend a lot of time on that today. So back to the face-to-face interview. If you're hiring a buyer agent, then you're going to be targeting questions in that interview process around the sales process. How do they handle certain scenarios? If you're hiring administrative, be beneficial to have some skills tests that you can give them. You know, give them a set of data that you want presented in a spreadsheet, or ask them to put together a listing description based on the notes that you bring back from a listing interview. Depending on what you're asking that role to do, there are plenty of things that you can pull together that give you a demonstration of their skills. I would also, if they're going to be admin, recommend that you have them fill out by hand just a standard application for employment. And you can Google this, get it online, pick it up at the local office supply store. The reason that I take that step in the interview process and that it's beneficial to you is if you're going to have this person handwriting anything, to your clients or to you, you need to make sure they have legible handwriting. Best way to find that out is just to have them fill out a one-page application. So during this first face-to-face interview then, you're looking for how they present themselves, how they communicate with you. And it's important to note here, what we tend to do when we're looking to hire someone is we tend to hire people like us because we tend to like people like us, right? And that's not always the best fit for the position. You know, typically you're hiring to offset your weaknesses, not to duplicate your strengths. Think about that for a second. You're hiring people to offset your weaknesses, not to duplicate your strengths. And so to hire someone who's just like you is not going to further you down the road of having a more successful team, is it? Now, if your intention was to hire a buyer agent who's as good with the buyers as you are, then you are hiring someone who's like you. But remember, if they're exactly like you, chances are they're going to compete with you and not work for you. So another tool that we bring into this process, once we've been through the face-to-face interviews and we've narrowed that pool down to our top few candidates, we're going to go ahead and give them a behavioral assessment. Now, I've shared a couple here online on the webinar. We like to use People Keys. It's the DISC model, and it's a very comprehensive assessment that speaks not only to the person's individual style, but how they interact in a business work environment and with other team members, and gives us a real insight and perspective to not only that interaction, but also what is their work style? How do they work? And there's a free one online at 123test.com that you can also use. The drawback to that is it's a very surface assessment, and I would say for a free assessment, it does give you a good overview in terms of where do their core strengths lie. Are they more social? Are they more analytical? Do they fall into the supporter, nurturer category, and so they're going to be very loyal and build relationships with your clients? You can start to get some idea of that through the 123 test online. Now, it's important for you to realize that the behavioral assessment isn't necessarily a weeding out tool in the interview process. Rather, what it does is it gives you greater clarification of how someone likes to be communicated with and what their work style is. And that's very beneficial because it gives you insight as to how they might fit with other members of the team, including yourself. And so, you know, with personality styles, with behavioral styles, every style has been and is present in the real estate industry, and they've all been successful in varying roles. It really depends on the clarity you have on the role and what you want it to do. And so use it as a tool that supports the other pieces, but it isn't a make or break. Now, here's a step that almost every single person I've worked with in the real estate industry during the hiring process just steps right over and doesn't do. And it's huge to the outcome, and that is checking that candidate's reference list. You want to get the real story on somebody? Talk to the people they've worked with. This is going to include not only work references, but most people should be giving you character references or personal references, they might call them, as well. Take the time to make these calls, to send the emails, to really get an understanding of the person that you're hiring. Because let's face it, even the most successful hiring agencies have been duped by someone who's great in the hiring process and who fails in the follow-through. And so getting some conversations going with people who've had first-hand interaction and experience. And by the way, if someone's resistant to give you references, that ought to be a red flag right there. You know, part of this process, especially if you get a high number of candidates, is to weed out the bad stuff as quickly as possible. And so be looking for those red flags, and this is certainly one of them. Now, what are you going to be able to ask that person when you get on the phone? You can ask them anything, but you can't expect them to answer everything. And so as you're calling those references, ask, some larger corporate references are simply going to confirm that the person was employed there during a date range and that their termination was either voluntary or involuntary, and that's all they're going to want to give you. If the person's giving you good references, you're going to get people that are willing to have a conversation beyond that. And so you're looking for information, asking questions from those folks around what was this person's work ethic? Where did you find that they had the most challenges? What do I need to be aware of? What should I be excited about? Feel free to ask these questions because you've got no better resource than these people right here. I'm going to piggyback on this section too. It's not a separate step, but especially if you're going to have someone who's in your office, go ahead and get a background check done. It's typically a very low cost to have that done, and it's just another point of assurance, especially if you're going to put them in a position of perhaps being out in the field and placing lock boxes on a property, transporting signed documents and escrow checks. It's absolutely an easy, inexpensive way to put one more step of security and reassurance into the process. And then finally, do a social media check on them. Head over to Facebook and see if you can find them, or ask them to reach out to you so that they're easier to find, and see what type of things they're posting. If they've been posting rants about their employment or how happy they are it's Friday, you may have some red flags on your hand. And you'd be surprised what you can learn about someone just by looking at their social media channels. Typically LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter are going to be the top three. You may have other resources you want to check based on where you spend your time online, and they may even share with you another resource. Now,
Amy, just on that point, it's very important. I think you have to stress on what your assistants or buyer agents have access to. There's a lot of personal information that goes on in a real estate transaction for your client's information, their banking information, the big checks that go around for deposits, for escrow, whatever it is. Also, lockbox information. They'll have access to their homes a lot of the time if they're there helping with an open house. You don't want somebody there who has a background that's not conducive to building a big business.
Absolutely.
And one of the things with hiring a buyer's agent, a lot of the times, most of the boards that you're under, they already have to do a criminal background check to even get licensed. So a lot of the time, that step is taken, but it's still very important to check out their personal backgrounds or their work history. What's following them with them when they come to your new job.
Yeah, you've raised a great point there. What's following them? Pay attention to what those references tell you. If it didn't end amicably, there may be things following them that you don't want impacting your own reputation. So you've got to really do your due diligence there. So, if people have cleared the first face-to-face interview, you've done a behavioral assessment, it looks like you have a good fit there, and you've checked their references and you're hearing really positive things, then you're going to bring them back for the second face-to-face interview. And this is more an opportunity to really get into what the position entails, do more skills tests, and really get a feel for how this person might interact with the other members of your team. Now, if you're a solo agent, you may be thinking, well, I don't have other members of my team. You absolutely do. Who are you working with in mortgage? Who are you working with in title? Who are you working with right there in the office? Do you have an agent who does backup for you when you're on short vacation? Maybe you have someone in the office itself that is handling the escrows. These are your team, and so having them weigh in on the person is certainly of value. So get those people gathered around the table, and there's no reason why you can't have multiple people interviewing with those final candidates. So you're really looking for a cultural fit at this point beyond the ability to do the skills. Does this person mesh with the team you've assembled to move your transactions forward? And like I said earlier, it's also an opportunity to start looking at higher level tasks that you may want done. Now, once you've been through that second face-to-face interview, and what I actually see happen too often during the interview is someone will go ahead and make the offer. I think it's very important for you to take the formal step with this and put that offer into the form of a letter. You want to present a formal offer of employment so that you have documented what you've promised this person. So what goes into that offer letter? We want to include what are they going to be compensated, obviously. What's your expectation in terms of hours? Dress code. Any vacation that may apply. Any notification that you may want in terms of time off that they need. And then an expiration on it. Believe it or not, I've seen people really drag this part of the process out because they're trying to play one potential employer against the other. If you've made the decision that this person is a right fit for your team, then shore it up. Let's not leave it hanging open. Even if they're going to need to give significant notice to their current employer, their response to you doesn't need to be dragged out. And so 2 or 3 business days is plenty of time for them to get back with you with an answer. And if the terms of the offer of employment need to be negotiated, then you need to have a new letter that reflects the changes. We no longer live in a world where we can just go on a handshake, do we? So it's important to document this piece of the process. And it also, by the way, is going to support if regrettably down the road it ends up not being a right fit, every bit of this that you've documented is going to help support moving the process along. So have this formal offer.
Is just on that point, a lot of if you're an existing seller's agent, you're looking to grow your team, a lot of brokerages out there already have these sort of pre-built offers of employment for team members, because generally speaking, it's not the first time they've had a team under their brokerage. So I'd first go to the brokerage to say, do you have a contract that they can use for a team member or buyer's agent, or do they have something that they can reference to the agent? And if they don't, another great reference tool is just speak to somebody who already has an existing team. They're more than happy. Most agents I've found are more than happy to help another member out, even if they're not in the same brokerage. I don't like necessarily going on to like Google or doing an internet search for contracts, because one, you don't really know what's involved with the contracts themselves. If you are going to do that route, then I would make sure that you get your lawyer or a lawyer to review the contract before you give it to anybody. You wouldn't want them signing something that's going to be detrimental to you growing your business.
No, at this stage of the game, you really need to have something in place that you can sleep well at night over and feel good about. And so what Stephen's recommended here is a fantastic tip, and that is reach out to someone in your market. They've already done the legwork and paid an attorney to pull theirs together. So shorten that learning curve. Now, the formal offer of employment should not be confused with a full position description for the candidate. They're not the same thing. And so a full-blown job description that they sign off on at this stage of the game is also going to be important. You want them not only to have a clear understanding of what they're doing, but to acknowledge going into it, this is what I signed up for, this is what I committed to. So we've gone through this hiring process, and sometimes, more often than not, what I see with real estate agents is, well, let's just get them in here and they can shadow me for a week, and that's the best way for them to learn everything they need to know about their role. All right, well, That's certainly a valuable part of the process, but it isn't the whole process. You need to actually schedule the time and take the time to do an orientation. Orientation means introduce them to the tools and the systems that you have in place, everything from the voicemail to the logins for whatever software applications you're going to be having them use. Orienting them to the tools that are going to be in their hands day in, day out that they're going to use to perform the tasks. And then scheduling training for those things. Now, you may have good resources for online training for some of those tools. For example, if you're using Top Producer as your contact relationship manager, your CRM, then they have excellent video tutorials on the various aspects of that system. And so part of this may be integrating those types of tools with personal hands-on training. I sincerely believe that even with a skilled candidate, you should have daily time scheduled for at least the first week and possibly the first 2 weeks. That doesn't mean 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, 2 weeks in a row. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about being very intentional about the time you do spend, and you may be looking at 2 hours a day for those first 2 weeks. Have it on your schedule so that you don't get caught up in the craziness of your business and step over the most important step that's going to set that person up for success on your team. And so what does that training look like? Maybe it's partly you, it's partly other people on the team, and that may include, remember, your mortgage broker, somebody who's on the staff with the office. Figure out what are all the pieces, go back to that job description, and right next to each of those pieces, who's the best person to teach my new team member how to do this? And welcome them into the process and get it on a schedule. And then part of this training is assessing whether or not they're getting it, whether or not they're capturing what's being taught and being able to put it to practical use. And so having benchmarks along the way of what you want them to be able to accomplish within a certain period of time is incredibly important. Coming back to those benchmarks and saying, okay, you're excelling at this, and this still seems to be a challenge, so let's put more training time on the schedule or mentoring time. You know, if it's a buyer agent, the temptation is just follow me on some appointments, and then I'll follow you on some appointments, and then we'll be good. Well, the process of working with a buyer is deeper than that. There are systems involved. You want to make sure that they can use the tools. You know, if using a CRM, your buyer agent's got to be able to use that too. They need to understand how what they input interacts with the better functioning of the entire team and not just for their own purposes. Turning in files to the office, making sure that everything is complete in the file. There are a lot of pieces that go in even to just the buyer agent role from a systems perspective and a training perspective. And the more that we get this outlined and scheduled, the more successful an outcome we're going to have. So those are the 10 steps. We start out by knowing when we're ready to bring somebody on and who we need. Is it admin? Is it sales help? And then getting really clear on what that role is going to entail. Even hiring a buyer agent, you know, some people coming into the industry may think, well, I'm going to be doing buyers and listings. That may not be the case for what you need for your team. And so being very clear about what that role is going to look like. Reaching out to find the candidates, our third step. And looking not only at the external resources of placing an ad, but also what I'll call internal resources of referrals within our networks. Then moving into a phone interview, step 4. Really finding out, is this person going to be able to fulfill that role even from being on the phone? How do they sound? How do they articulate? Then taking the next step to step 5, having that first face-to-face interview. Does this person look the part? Do they walk the talk? Will they fit well in this environment? And what skills tests can I give them to identify if they're a right fit? Next step, number 6, our behavioral assessment. What can I identify through that helps me know if they're going to be a good fit for what I'm hiring? Then move to check those references. Move through that candidate reference list. Add to that, if it hasn't already been done, a background check, and certainly do your homework on their social media channels and see who is this person that I'm considering hiring. Then step 8, we're bringing them back for a second face-to-face interview. If we like what we see there and they fit with the culture, then we're going to move to step 9, which is our formal offer of employment. Provided everything comes together there, then we're looking for step 10, bringing together a solid orientation and training program that sets them up for success on our team. Now, it's not a step. Before I go to the next piece, Stephen, are there any additional comments you have on the hiring process or any questions that you often get from folks that I can help?
Well, I think you've covered everything on the hiring process, but a lot of the questions that I get are, what am I going to get the new hire to do for me? A lot of the times, most agents don't understand what they need help with because they can handle everything as it is now, the paperwork, the lead generation, the follow-up, all that stuff. What we're doing here is basically showing you on how to build a big business, right? We're not saying like you're going to hire somebody just to make an extra sale once a year. It's not, there's no reason for that. So we're building you a big business by saying, look, you need these people in place so that you can have somebody doing all your paperwork. You can have somebody doing all your lead generation. You can have somebody doing all your buyer showings. So I think the challenge with most agents is, what is it that these new hires are going to do for me? And just a note here, National Association of Realtors just came out last week with their statistics for 2013. It was mostly internet statistics. And sadly, these are the statistics. So 73% of all sellers work with the first realtor that they see. Okay, it's pretty good statistics. Yeah, 65% of all buyers use the first agent they speak to, whether it's through email or phone. Okay, so it's very important that you get there quickly. 54% of all internet leads go unanswered, sadly enough. And 42% of all internet leads only get one response. So that being said, if the very least all you do is hire somebody to do your lead generation answering or follow-up phone calls with your client base, you're going to retain a lot more business if you have somebody there dedicated to returning these phone calls. I'll give you a great example. When I first started selling real estate, it seems like quite some time ago now, but I was so green. I had no idea how the business operated. And we didn't have a good orientation at the time when I was with this other brokerage who will remain nameless at this point. But what they basically told me to do is like, your license here is your business cards, just go at it. I didn't know what to do. So the first step was at the time I had somebody who wanted to purchase a property. So not knowing how the business operated, I actually called into the office, and the secretary obviously had no idea who I was because like there was no orientation, there was nothing, right? So I said, my name is Stephen Young. I'm looking to buy a condominium with a purchaser, right? I just think that this is how it works. My logic thinks just call into the office that I work at. Maybe they can help me out, right? So what they did is they paged the office of 130 agents saying, Stephen Young looking to buy a condo, right? So the agents not knowing I'm an actual realtor, not knowing how the system works, you would think I would be bombarded with phone calls out of 130 top producing agents. There's a large office in Toronto. So the response was I got 10 phone calls that day. So it's pretty good, right? But 10 out of 130 is not so good. And the other problem was I got 3 more phone calls 3 days later. I was like, what?
Wow.
So you would think there is a speed component to selling real estate. It's very important to respond. But think about I'm not sure what the percentage is, 10 out of 130. It's not very good of people who have actually responded. If you had a page that came to you and said, whether they knew me or not, buyer looking to buy something, and only 10 out of 130 agents actually responded to it. It's pretty bad.
Shocking.
Yeah, it's very shocking.
That's less than 8%, by the way.
Okay, thank you for that. I didn't have a calculator in front of me. But with that being said, though, it's that was almost 10 years ago that happened. But I'm assuming that the business hasn't changed all that much.
Well, look, we get into this process because we know we can't do it all. That's the bottom line.
Yeah.
The whole reason you build a team is because you acknowledge, I can't do all of this, and B, let me rephrase it, I can't do it all and reach the level of success I want to reach. You can do it all, and you can limit yourself and hit a ceiling on what you can produce, because there's only so much that's humanly possible for you to do in a 24-hour day. And so how do you know when it's time to hire? It's when you want to do more in terms of generating revenue, but can't because all of the hours in your day are filled. And so then it just becomes a question of what's filling my day. And by bringing someone on, yeah, you may be handling the paperwork great for the transactions you have, but what if you want to double the number of transactions? You can't do that if you're already working 14 hours a day. You can't work 28 hours a day. It's not possible. There aren't 28 hours in a day.
That's right.
And so you've got to look at, yeah, even if I'm good at this, is this the right thing for me to give up in order for me to get where I want to go from a bigger picture standpoint? You know, for some people, it may not even be about the money. It's about getting the hours in the day back.
That's right.
Maybe you're tired of working 60 or 70 hours a week, and you'd like to spend more time with your friends and family. The only way to do that is the leverage. The only way to do that and maintain your income level is to leverage.
Yeah, when I was at my peak of sales, you know, literally earning hundreds of thousands of dollars, it was fantastic. The agents in the office were shocked that I would not work weekends and evenings, and they just didn't know how I did it all. It's not that my business stopped when I went home. It's just I personally don't work weekends and evenings because I enjoy time with my family. I enjoy time with my friends. So the business was still operating. I still had people working for me in the evenings and weekends. But me personally, I wasn't working. I usually work less than 40 hours a work week.
Mm-hmm.
It's just the way you have to build it.
And you do that through leverage.
Absolutely.
And through creating boundaries, which is a whole different topic. So, you know, this process is about you really getting clear on what you want for yourself in the bigger picture of things, and then finding the right people to help you get that, whether that's a salesperson or administrative person, and then walking the process so that you make a good hire. Now, we can't have this hiring conversation without having the de-hiring conversation, and I'd like to give just a few minutes to that, if I may, Stephen.
No, that's
because
important.
Even with the best hiring process, let's face it, this is still a roll of the dice to a degree on bringing someone onto your team.
Mm-hmm.
And so we put a lot of due diligence into the front end of the process to minimize the back end of the process, and it's still going to be something that we ultimately have to deal with at some point in our lives. And so looking at the unwinding then of what do you do when you have someone that's not working out, sales or admin. And the first step to that is get really clear on whether you have communicated well what your expectations are. Once you can confirm for yourself that yes, indeed you have, then it's informing that team member of what's not working. Now, you know, we'll go back to the old one-minute manager techniques. You always start by telling someone what they're doing right first, and then talk to them about what they need to improve on. So I suggest that be documented, because you want to be able to go back to that documentation and say, here's what you committed to working on, and are we making progress or are we not making progress with that? Once you've determined it's just not going to work out and that person's not going to shift with their performance to a point where it makes it a good fit, then I encourage you to be swift, direct, and compassionate in the process. Howard Brinton used to always say, when's the best time to fire someone? The first time you think about doing it. Chances are, if you've had the thought of letting someone go, you've already made your decision. And so don't drag this out into a 3-month affair. If someone's not working out, be swift to articulate what's not working, give a short time frame for an improvement in performance. And within 30 days, you're either keeping or getting rid of this person. You're helping them move on to their next opportunity in their lives, because it's not benefiting either one of you to drag out the process. And so again, by having good documentation to say, look, here's what I need in the role that I'm not getting, and I'm not seeing that you're going to be able to deliver it, so that there's no confusion about why you're making the decision that you are. And then, you know, give that person, depending on the role they're in, you may need them to stick around for a little while as part of the transition process, or you may decide, you know what, it's best for both of us if we just give you the freedom to start looking for that next role. And perhaps because of their performance, you're not sure they're the best person to help you cross-train a new employee anyway. So document, 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 because that is protecting you in the long run. You can show that the communication's been there, nobody's been caught off guard. And even in the case of someone who you think is going to work out, you still should be having benchmarks and documenting along the way. Have a 2-week review, a 30-day review, a 60-day review, and a 90-day review. And that gives them the benefit of knowing what they're doing well and what they need to work on. You're setting them up for best possible outcome. So it's not a fun topic to talk about, and it's important that you have the closure at the end of the process as well. Also have your systems and structure in place so that you can be swift with things like changing passwords and logins, so that you have your systems protected and your client information protected. Anything to add to that part of the process, Stephen?
Yeah, and I'm not sure who said it, but I was given advice years ago, and it says you have to be very slow to hire and quick to fire. And
Absolutely.
what that
We
means
tend
is,
to do the exact opposite,
I
don't
know,
we?
you're so anxious to get somebody on board, you just want the first person who walks in your door. But the challenge is sometimes it takes a really long time to get those people out of there if they're not working out. So I take your
Yeah.
time, be very patient, make sure all the contracts are signed properly, make sure the contract's in mostly your favor if you need to get rid of the person. But yeah, it's slow to hire, quick to fire. And I've sadly done the opposite a few times myself here in the brokerage where we're hiring agents, where we don't do the proper background checks. You know, it's quick to hire, and then again, same thing. It's very difficult to get rid of them, right? Because you don't do the proper
Absolutely.
steps in place. So I've learned personally from experience, but you know, it's one of the most important steps to building any big business is to be hire the right people and take your time hiring them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would offer a piece of reading for those of you who are struggling at the front end of the process, getting clear on what you need. Go pick up a book called The E-Myth Revisited by Michael Gerber.
Yeah, it's a great book.
Fabulous for laying the foundation of building a solid team.
Yeah, absolutely. They give the story of a bakery in the book, and it's just how bakers need to do everything: accounting, baking the muffins or cookies, whatever they talk about in the book, and they have to do everything else: the marketing, the front office, the back office. And it turns out they're there all day long, every day. The challenge with real estate is the same thing, right? Like, you know, if you're swamped all day with paperwork, and then you got to work all evening with your clients, and then you got to start an offer process at 10 o'clock at night, negotiate the thing into the evening. You know, nobody wants to do that, but most agents, that's the way they build their business.
Yep.
They don't treat it like a business.
And that's the big aha. This is a business.
It is 100%. It's a business. It can be a fantastic business. One of the other things I wanted to mention, someone brought up to me, is how would you compensate your buyer agents and assistants as a year-end bonus if you reach a certain level?
Well, you know, there are different schools of thought on that. Some people are wired that they just like to do random intermittent bonuses to make them special and to not have people grow into an expectation.
Right.
If you do associate something with the year end, the goal needs to be clearly articulated at the beginning of the year so that they know what they're working toward.
Right.
And you have to fight the temptation of, well, we didn't quite make it, but I feel kind of bad, so I want to give them a partial bonus. You know, how committed are you to making this outcome happen? And do you want to reward mediocrity?
Right.
Now, if they get really close, it's a different story. But, you know, if you're targeting 100 transactions and the team hits 60, are you still going to pay a bonus? It's not a good financial decision, likely, in addition to not being a good support of working towards the goal. Now, the other thing you need to ask yourself at that point is, were we being realistic about the goal we set? And, you know, every compensation package is different. Some people prefer to be on a straight salary because that gives, especially in an administrative role, that gives them a reassurance that they've got the same amount of money coming in every week, and they will take the security over the risk reward any day of the week. Whereas, you know, you hire someone as a buyer agent, you really want them to be motivated to hit the goals, and so they get, the more risk they take, the greater the rewards they get. And so you may put something in place and say, look, you know, our standard is 2 transactions a month, so 24 transactions at the end of the year. But if you manage to close 3 transactions a month over the course of the year, you hit 36 transactions, then I'm going to build this bonus in. And if you clear 48 transactions, we're going to build another bonus in. It's partly the role, and it's partly the individual and understanding what motivates them.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
for some people, it's not a cash reward at all. You know, you may have an administrative person who never does anything for themselves. They're very other focused. And so the bonus you give them at the end of the year may be a full day at the spa because they'd never spend that money themselves on themselves. But when it's given to them, they're certainly not going to let that gift certificate go to waste.
Yeah, I think it's important in terms of who you're hiring as well. Like you said, like if it's an administrator person, you may not have the ability, or they may not have the ability to change your business directly in terms of the volume if they're just doing paperwork, let's say, right?
Absolutely.
But I've once hired a gentleman to do lead generation for me, and I said it's 100% commission, this job, this position. You have to generate more leads for me, and every lead that you generate for me, you're going to get a referral fee. So obviously it was a fantastic motivator for this person because they just want to generate more and more leads, because the more leads they generate, the more deals I closed, which means the more money they made. So it really depends on who you're hiring, what role they're doing in your business.
Well, and I've even seen in an administrative role, for the parts that they're directly influencing.
Yeah.
You have a transaction coordinator who's responsible for getting things to the closing table.
Yeah.
I've seen incentives based on it closing on time versus getting delayed. And they do have some control over that. How much they push to make sure that everything's been turned in on time and everything's gotten to the lender that needs to be there. They may be incented at the closing end of things. Because it's part of what they can control. It's very frustrating for someone to have an incentive given to them that they have zero control over.
Right, yeah.
Well, Stephen, that's what I have for today. I thank you for having me on. It's one of my favorite things to talk about. I think it's a critically important process.
Yeah, I think this is one of the most important things that if all our training goes to waste, and this sticks for all our realtors, this is the most important step in any real estate business. If you look at if you compare any business outside of real estate, you know, like go to any Fortune 500 company, go to any like doctor's office, lawyer's office, they have a whole team in place. Like they would not run their office. You know, can you imagine going to your doctor's office and the doctor checks you in and then he brings you to the waiting room, and then he comes in and checks you out, and then you have to walk out and he bills you and then he does the paperwork. You'd run out of that office as soon as you could. You just would not.
Oh yeah, we'd be raising eyebrows through the whole time we were there.
So you shouldn't do that as a realtor either.
No, definitely not.
No. So I appreciate your time today, Amy. It's always a fantastic time speaking with you, and I really appreciate today's event. I think this is probably our last session with you for the year 2013. So I wish you all the best for the holiday.
Thank you very much.
And we'll speak to you early 2014 with some new program material for all our students and our listeners.
It's absolutely a pleasure. Thanks for having me, Stephen.
Okay, thank you.